because today probably won't be a super long day, but it's important because we're going to go over how to create an ER diagram from a design case. And you know how I picked this design case? I gave it on a test once, and out of like 25 points, I think the median was like 10, which showed me, and then I went back and looked at the homework assignments, and everyone had also bombed the homework assignment. So I learned from that if I don't go over a comprehensive case and show you how to create the ER diagram, you're just going to flounder on the homework, and then you're going to flounder on the exam. So it would definitely behoove you to pay attention to what I'm talking about today, because I'm kind of going to be showing you how to derive the relationships and the entities that you need for your ER diagrams. Okay? So we have this. So basically, this was, as I said, an exam question a long time ago, and it gave the information for an investment firm, and then it asked 3 questions to define the entities and attributes for each entity, to identify the primary and foreign keys for each entity, and then to draw an ER diagram for this investment firm. And I intentionally did it in that order because if you can get the entities first and then you can get the foreign keys, you have a good shot at getting the relationships right. Not a lock, but if you can get the foreign keys right, you have a good shot at getting relationships. So you needed to show the entities, the relationships, and the multiplicity of the relationships. Okay. So we give you a list of information about the firm, and hopefully you've already read this case study. If not, hopefully you're good at speed reading. So in looking at it, you basically know that I'm not wasting time giving you information you don't need to know. So pretty much everything in there is going to be an information about an entity, an attribute, or a relationship. Now, you may remember I said that entities are nouns and relationships are verbs. So you should be looking for nouns and verbs here. So you see that the firm has a number of offices. Each office has a number of investment advisors who service investors, and investors own stocks that pay dividends. There is a lot there in A to digest. Okay? So we'll start with something that always trips up about 1/5 of you, which is the firm has a number of offices, and I see in the ER diagram, I end up seeing firm has offices, and this is wrong. Okay? So the firm is the database. This is the thing that we're creating the database for. There is only one instance of the firm. Okay? So it is not a relation. It is not an entity. It is the database. Okay? So in this case, the only thing of interest is that we have offices, and offices definitely do look like they might be an entity. Now, we don't know that for sure at this point because we haven't read the rest of the description. But just looking at A, we probably can imagine that offices might be an entity. And then we see that each office has a number of investment advisors. Well, Advisors sounds like it could also be an entity. It's a noun. And has is a crummy verb, but nonetheless it is a verb. It looks like that might be defining a relationship between offices and advisors. Okay? Why a relationship? Anytime I have a verb that connects two entities in a sentence, most likely we have a relationship. That's important. Anytime two entities are connected by a verb in a sentence, there is a good chance that a relationship exists between the two entities. Okay, that's very important because the biggest thing I see on tests and on homework assignments is an inability to identify relationships. Well, that is a very big clue. When you have a verb connecting two entities in a sentence, there's actually an excellent chance that the relationship exists between the two entities. So there is an outstanding chance that there will be a relationship between office and advisors. And we see who service customers. There's another verb. Service customers. Service is a verb. Looks like investors are going to be another entity. I probably should have said who advised. That would have been much better. Probably would have made it even clearer that there is a relationship. But there certainly appears to be an advising relationship between advisors and investors. Okay? And then we see that investors own stocks that pay dividends. So there is some more verbs in there. Investors own stocks. Stocks pay dividends. Okay? So it may well be that stocks is another entity. That pay dividends is a little more nebulous, as we will see. We'll get into that. Is dividends an entity? It doesn't really seem like a dividend is an entity. For those of you who don't know what a dividend is, stocks often pay out a certain amount every quarter or every year, portion of their profits that they return to shareholders. And a dividend seems more like an attribute, to be honest, than a entity. So that bears some watching. Okay. But it seems like in A, we've gotten a lot of our entities. It seems like offices is an entity, advisors is an entity, investors is an entity, stocks is an entity. We're not sure quite what's going on here with dividends. Firm, again, not an entity. It is the database. Okay. An office is managed by one of its advisors. Well, this isn't defining any new entities, but we have a verb connecting two entities, an office and advisors. So that looks very much like another relationship that we're going to have to keep tabs on. It looks like a manages relationship. Okay, another good thing is the verb used to describe a relationship is often a good name for the relationship as long as you haven't duplicated it. Okay, C. An investor has a name, a unique investor number, a single investment advisor, and owns 0 or more stocks. Okay, a lot of descriptive information here. The name and the investment, well, the name and investment advisor Well, the name is descriptive. The investor number seems like what? Primary key, actually, an identifying attribute. It's an identifying attribute, a primary key. A single investment advisor. What kind of attribute? Remember I gave you 3 last time. Descriptive, identifying, and I think I called the third a foreign key attribute or a referencing attribute. This is a foreign key or referencing attribute. Okay, it's referencing a advisor. Certainly, again, looks like a relationship. And owns 0 or more stocks. Okay, well, this is interesting. This sounds like multiplicity. It sounds like it's giving us the number of occurrences in a relationship. Okay, so this owns, again, here we had it up here and down here. So it looks like it's a relationship, and it looks like it's telling us about the multiplicity of that relationship. Okay. Now we come down to D. We see that each investor's holding of a stock contains information about the stock's ticker symbol, the stock's name, the number of shares owned by the investor, the dividend per share paid by the stock. So this is the first time we come into some stuff that requires a little more nuance. So it certainly seems like we have information about a stock here because its ticker symbol. What do we know? What kind of attribute is a ticker symbol? Primary key. It uniquely identifies the stock. A 3 or 4 character code that uniquely identifies the stock. So it's a identifying attribute or primary key. The stock's name, that sounds descriptive. The number of shares owned by the investor sounds descriptive. And the dividend per share sounds rather descriptive. Okay, so that sounds more like descriptive information. Those are probably going to be attributes. We're going to see, though, that this isn't quite as simple as it looks later. Okay, an investment advisor has a name, an advisor number, 1 or more investors that the advisor services, and an office to which the advisor belongs. Well, this is giving us multiple things. It's giving us a name, so that seems like a descriptive attribute. A unique advisor number. Well, anytime I hear the word unique, I think identifying attribute. Unique, synonymous with identifying attribute. Okay, probably a primary key. 1 or more investors. Okay, so it is 1 or more investors that the advisor services. Okay, what does 1 or more sound like? Multiplicity. So it looks like it's defining multiplicity for our relationship between an advisor and investors. Okay, and an office to which the advisor belongs. Okay, so up here each office has a number of investment advisors. What you may not have realized was not only was that defining a relationship, but it was giving us some multiplicity information. Okay, each office has a number of investment advisors, so that's certainly giving us cardinality, which is maximum number. This is different, the other side of the relationship. So this is implying that an advisor belongs to only 1 office. So it's also giving us multiplicity information about that relationship. that we can use later, and that is that an advisor seems to belong to exactly one office. Not many offices, but exactly one. And that is confirmed in G, actually. An advisor is associated with only one office. Okay, then F, an office has an office number and an address. So probably office number is going to look like what? A primary key and an address. Now I know you might think, oh, an office where a staff member is, but that's not it. Here, offices actually means more like a branch. Might have been better if the description had said the firm has a number of branches, because offices you might think, oh, that's someone's actual office number, but it's not. Okay, it's their branch. So really, it's an office has a branch number and an address. Address is descriptive. It will be an attribute. Okay, an office may have multiple advisors. So that kind of just repeats what we were told up here. Each office has a number of investment advisors. Okay, an office may have multiple advisors. So that's kind of repetitious, but anytime we see things like multiple, 0 or more, 1 or more, exactly 1, those are multiplicities. They're giving us multiplicity information. Okay, the dividend per share is determined by the stock. So it seems like dividend per share might be a descriptive attribute that goes with stock. So that we're still a little up in the air. Investors own stocks that pay dividends. The dividend per share is determined by the stock. Looks like an attribute. We're maybe not exactly sure how to handle it yet. Finally, we have when a stock gets purchased or sold by an investor, we record the stock's ticker symbol, the transaction price, date, blah, blah, blah. A stock gets purchased or sold by an investor. That sounds like some kind of relationship because we have a verb. Now you might be thinking, okay, we have two verbs there, and that is true. So we might have to keep in mind maybe it's two relationships or maybe it's just kind of like a transaction. So it's the same relationship, but it certainly looks like some kind of relationship here. And that relationship appears to have a number of attributes. So the stock's ticker symbol is what kind of attribute for this relationship? It's part of the primary key. It's an identifying attribute. The transaction price, the date, the number of shares purchased or sold probably seem more like descriptive information. The investor who purchased or sold the stock probably seems like it is identifying information, for more like a key. Okay, same thing. And the advisor who conducted the transaction for the investor. So it seems like we have three identifying attributes here, which are also, they're not just identifying attributes. What is also kind of the stock's ticker symbol, the investor who purchased the stock, and the advisor? What are those attributes like? They're foreign keys. They're references to other entities. Anytime you have an attribute that references an entity, it's a foreign key. Okay? Those are different from descriptive attributes. Descriptive attributes don't reference, they're not like pointers. Okay? But when we're talking about attributes that reference other entities, those are more like pointer attributes. Those are foreign keys. Okay? It should also be telling you that this is looking like a tertiary relationship. Why tertiary? Well, there's three entities here. A stock is purchased by an investor, and there's an advisor who conducted the transaction. So this is looking actually like a tertiary or three-degree relationship because there's three entities here in this point. Okay? So it's always hard to identify multiple degree relationships, I find, for people new to ER diagrams, but oftentimes it's because there's three or more entities in the sentence. And here we have it. There's three entities in this sentence. Okay? Now, for that reason, this is looking very much like information about a relationship. Okay? So we've gone through here, and we hopefully at this point have started to identify our entities. So right now, it would seem we have an office, which has an office number and address. That is from F. Seems like we have investor info from up here. An investor has a name, a unique investor number, an investment advisor. Investor number, name, and advisor. Now notice we don't have stocks here, but anytime a relationship is one-to-many, we can't have multi-valued attributes. It's almost like stocks. Well, it's not really a multi-valued attribute, but we can't represent multiple values. We can't have multi-valued attributes. So even if stocks is a foreign key, we can't have one or many of them in a relation. And an attribute has to be single valued. So it was okay to represent this investment advisor relationship in the relation because it's one-to-one. We can represent it with a single valued attribute, but we can't do that with stocks. So stocks does not make it into investor info down here. Okay, advisor has an advisor number. From up here has a name, advisor number, an office to which the advisor belongs. There's the office number. Again, it's a one-to-one relationship. But again, we don't see the investors that the advisor is servicing because we can't represent that here. It doesn't matter either because we represented it there. We got that information in the investor info entity. Now with a stock, we said an investor's holding of a stock contains information about the stock's ticker, the stock's name, the number of shares owned by the investor, and the dividend per share paid by the stock. Yet down here, you don't see number of shares or investor. You just see stock, ticker, name, dividend. Okay, and that's where you have to start exercising some judgment. Okay, the holdings is more like a relationship. Okay, it's not really, so we had an investor owned stock. So it's more like it's a relationship. Stock is more like an entity. It has a identifying ticker, it has a name, and it has a dividend. So we actually make it an entity. And down here with holding is where we have the relationship expressed between a investor and a stock. We have the ticker, which is the stock. We have the investor number, and then the quantity that they hold. Okay, so that's back to D, an investor's holding of a stock. The reason D was somewhat difficult to handle is that D was giving us information both about this relationship holding, but it was also giving us information about this stock entity. So D was complicated because it actually had two different things going on. It was telling us about a stock entity, but it was also telling us about an investor's holding, which is a relationship. Okay? And again, holding is like a verb. I know it's a little hard, maybe hard to see, but an investor's holding of a stock. Noun, 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 verb. Okay? Investor's holding of a stock. This was a relationship. Again, when you see two entities in the same sentence, good chance there's a relationship between them, which got represented down here as a holding. Now here, stock gets purchased. It turned out that purchased or sold was really a type. So when you see type here, it's transaction type, buy or sell. It is a relation. So I said to find the entity's multi-way relationships. This is a multi-way relationship. Now, there's an interesting thing here. Look at the attributes: ticker, investor number, advisor number, price, date, quantity, and type. I don't know, at this point, many of you are probably too young to have done any kind of stock trading. Okay? But if you're trying to identify a primary key here, let's try to identify a primary key not using transaction ID. So normally you're given like a confirmation ID, but let's say you don't have the transaction ID. Let's try to identify the primary key for this. Okay? Well, is the ticker enough? Should be obvious, no, because we have multiple transactions involving the same stock. So, is it enough to know about the ticker symbol and the investor? Well, no, because you can accumulate a stock over time. You buy it in different lots, or you may buy on one time and sell at another time, so that's not enough. Also, we record the advisor number because while the person has an advisor, you may not know this, but sometimes when you call up an office, your advisor is not there. You still want the transaction performed. So the person who actually takes the order and performs the transaction for you may not be the person who advises you. So even this is not enough of identification. So you might think, okay, the stock, the person who purchased it, the advisor, and the date on which it was purchased might be enough. But no, there's active day trading going on. Many people buy and sell the same stock each day. So the date by itself, along with the investor, advisor, and ticker, means nothing. Okay, what about quantity? If we add quantity to it, it still does us no good. I could buy 100 shares today at 10, turn around at 11 and buy another 100 shares. Or maybe I sell that 100 shares. I made a profit. I want to lock it in. So that's not enough. So you say, okay, add type to it, because now maybe with buy and sell. But it still doesn't do it, because I could buy 2 separate 100 share lots on the same day at the same price. There's nothing to say that when I buy 100 shares at 10 that the price isn't the same at 11. What I'm saying here is that this is an instance where every single attribute is needed in order to get the primary key. And in fact, without the time, what's missing here is a timestamp. Without a time, you would end up with duplicate tuples unless you issued a confirmation number for the tuple. It turns out that even with all the attributes combined, it's not enough to uniquely identify a transaction. You need a timestamp for that, and that's not in there. Okay, if you had a timestamp, so if this date was turned into a timestamp, now it would be sufficient for it to be ticker, investment number, and probably the timestamp. Actually, you'd need to know the advisor number as well. But does the advisor number, is it required? No, actually, if you had a timestamp, ticker, investment number, and date would uniquely define it. Okay? But that's the reason you get typically confirmation IDs on things like bookings, reservations. Anytime you make a payment on an order, you typically get a confirmation number. The reason is there's just too many attributes required to get a primary key. But the important thing is, even though this thing has a primary key, it's not an entity. It is a relationship. Okay? So, questions about this? Okay, moving on. It is pretty easy to identify the primary keys for everything except our relations, our relationships. So for holding, it is a ticker and an investment number, because an investor can hold multiple stocks, and a stock could have multiple investors holding it. So you need both for the primary key for the holding. We just went through the problems of finding a primary key for a stock transaction. Okay, and then if we go back up here and look, again, anything that points to a primary key in another relation is a foreign key. So here, advisor number is a pointer to a primary key in another relation, so it's going to be a foreign key for an investor. For an advisor, the office number is pointing to another entity, so it's a foreign key. For a stock transaction, this thing's going to be stock full of foreign keys because it's a relationship. Investor number, advisor number, and ticker are all foreign keys into other relations. And for holding, again, it's a relationship. So all subcomponents of the primary key are also foreign keys right here. So here, notice that attributes could be both primary keys and foreign keys. When does that happen? Typically in a relationship. So that typically, the primary key is not going to be a foreign key typically if the thing is an entity. You're only going to have the primary key also being a foreign key if the thing is a relationship. Now there's one exception, and that's where if this were a subtype. Remember, for subtypes, the primary key is also a foreign key to the supertype. That would be the one exception to the rule. But normally, if the primary key is also a foreign key, we're talking about a relationship, not an entity. Okay, so let's take a look at the ER, or let's start drawing the ER diagram. And you may have to follow along now on your computer because I have to go to the doc cam and I can't show both at the same time. So you may want to look at the computer while I go to the doc cam. So we've pretty much identified office as an entity. And we've identified an advisor as an entity. We've identified an investor as an entity. And we've pretty much identified a stock as an entity. Okay, now if I come back here for a moment, you might be thinking that stock transaction and holding are also entities, but as I hopefully have conveyed to you, they're not. They are relations or relationships, and a big way there's multiple ways that you could have determined that these two things are relationships. Okay, one is from the verb that was used to connect them, okay? An investor has a holding of a stock, okay? It was a verb connecting two entities. Down here, you might have called it transactions, or purchases, but you can't really call it purchases because it was purchased or sold. But a stock is purchased by an investor and the advisor who conducted the transaction. Again, that's sounding like a verb, hence it's a relationship. Now I can understand you deciding that purchases and sales should be separate relationships. I probably wouldn't ding you for that. Okay? It's just easier to say they're the same, they're a transaction, and I'll separate them by type. Okay? But this is something where you might actually have a relationship that has a supertype subtype structure. You might actually have said that the supertype was a transaction, and then it has two subtypes, which were a purchase and a sale. Now, in this case, oh, you can't see it. Thank you. You might have said that the transaction could have a purchase or a sale. So this is the supertype. These are subtypes, yet these are relationships. That's fine when you get down to the relation level to define it that way. Now, because they shared all attributes, what's the only attribute that's different? It's the type. So there's no real reason to distinguish them. You might as well just have a single transaction because all the attributes are shared in common except for the type. But if you had some additional information that was specific to a purchase or a sale, this might be the way you roll. Okay, and you might show both relationships in the ER diagram. Okay, and as I said, if you chose to show both in an ER diagram, I wouldn't take off points for doing so. Okay, so moving back, we have to now show our relationships here. We'll do the easy ones first. We know that an investor has an advisor, okay? But that's not the right way to say it. What we really say is that an advisor advises, or I use the verb services, investors. Okay, and we need to determine the multiplicity of that relationship. So we direct the arrow from the one to the many. One advisor, many investors. Okay, we were told that an advisor could advise many advisees. So you have to determine, we know that the cardinality is many. There was no limit on how many investors there could be. You'd have to talk and clarify, but normally a new advisor might not yet have any investors. So at the beginning, they might not have any investors. On the other side, how many advisors can an investor have? Right here. An investor has a single investment advisor. Doesn't say they can have zero. It doesn't say they can have many. It says a single investment advisor, which means that it is a minimum of one and a maximum of one. It's a one-to-one. It's a 1.1, minimum of one, maximum of one. Okay? We also have that an advisor, or that an office employs advisors. So we might say that an office employs, that was has in the description, and an office employs advisors. Okay, and again we go from the one to the many. If you remember, also the way you direct an arrow is toward the entity that has the foreign key. It is advisor that has office number. So the advisor has the foreign key, so we point it that direction. Back here we said that an office may have multiple advisors, but an advisor is associated with only one office. So that means that an office may have one to many advisors, presumably, or again, we'd clarify, maybe when an office is being built, it has zero. So you just have to clarify that. And, one second, an advisor belongs to exactly one office. So again, it's 1.1. We say an advisor belongs to a single office. Yes? Wait, what assumption? You should. So there, that's where if I don't say it, I would state your assumption explicitly why you are saying one or why you're saying zero. Okay? So the zero, as long as it's reasonable, like if you say, okay, when someone is first hired, they may not yet have any clients. So that's a reasonable thing for putting zero. Or you may say that when someone is hired, that they are at an office, therefore it has to be 1:: or 1.1, or that we don't add an office until it's complete and is open, in which case it has to have at least, as long as you make an assumption that is reasonable, okay, if I haven't stated otherwise.
It's more about the
Mm-hmm. Mm. In the real world, you actually probably wouldn't make that assumption. You'd call up someone and say, okay, what's the deal? Like, does an office go into the database when it's being constructed? If the answer is yes, it should be 0 to many because you can't have any. So actually, in real world, you should clarify it if possible. Okay, so we got 2 relationships in the book. Let's see. If we go back here and look at our foreign keys, anytime we have foreign keys, we probably have a relationship. Okay, so we've knocked off these 2. It looks like we have 2 more left to go. Okay, so we start with holding. That is, the 2 foreign keys are ticker and investor number, and it said investors holding of a stock. It certainly looks like a binary relationship between a investor and a stock. So we'll say holds stock. Okay, now I directed it towards stock. I could have directed it the other way too. I could have said stock is owned by an investor. Okay, let's look at why. We've got to look at the multiplicity. We know that an investor may own 0 or more stocks. So here I've spelled it out. The multiplicity for an investor is that they can hold 0 or more stocks. What about a stock? How many investors may it be owned by? That's not definitively said here, but you probably could infer that the same stock might be owned by multiple investors. Okay? In the real world, they're owned by normally hundreds or thousands of investors, but at our company, certainly it stands to reason that more than one investor may own that stock. And it's reasonable to assume that we're only going to probably have the stock in the database if someone owns it. But again, I would take either 0 or 1 here because you still may want to have it in the database even if temporarily no investor owns it. So I would be good either way with it being either 0 to many or 1 to many. I'm just going to write 0 to many, but I'd be just as happy with 1 to many. The reason now that I could have directed the arrow in either direction becomes obvious. When you have a many-to-many relationship, which is what this is many-to-many. Why is it many-to-many? Can someone tell me? You can have many, so stars on both cardinalities, right? Many on either side. But in this case, the way you see a many-many is when you have stars on both cardinalities. So it's a many-many relationship. So I could have, a many-many relationship can be oriented either way. In this case, because we had an investor owns 0 or more stocks, it seems better, actually I probably should say owns, better to orient it from investor to stock. The other thing is, remember I said it's better to use action verbs than to be verbs. If I oriented the arrow the other way, I would say stock is owned by. That's a to be verb. Okay, it's not as action, it's more indirect. So we prefer action verbs. And finally, the last one, we've saved the best for last, this one, a stock transaction, and we have 3 foreign keys, which should strongly suggest it's a tertiary relationship among an advisor, a stock, and an investor. Yes?
You arrow in the foreign keys.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't you say it goes towards the foreign key, or am I wrong?
So it
It's like,
normally
doesn't the
goes
stock
toward
doesn't
the
have
foreign key, but in holding, you both both foreign keys
No,
are
for the
there.
stock and the advisor. That's not.
Wait,
So
stock and it.
the last one that we
Oh,
did.
wait, this one holding?
I think he was doing this.
Oh, okay.
I was doing holding.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're getting to this one. Okay. So a stock is got 3 foreign keys, which essentially, unless you have good reason to know otherwise, strongly suggests a tertiary relationship. Now, it also, we know that stock transaction is a relationship. I've pretty much, I think, at this point, hammered home the fact that it is a relationship. Sometimes you could have an entity that has more than one foreign key, and in that case, it would be 2 separate relationships. But here, I've really hammered home, this is a relationship. Stock transaction is a relationship. It is not an entity. Therefore, when I have 3 foreign keys, it's a tertiary. So when I go over here, I should draw a diamond between investor, stock, and advisor. And in my solution, I called it purchases. That was bad because it's not necessarily. I'm going to say transacts. I know in my answers I said purchases, but it could be a sale, so that's transacts. If you can't read that, it's transacts. Now, diamonds are undirected. We only direct binary relationships. So we leave this undirected, but we still need to be able to attach multiplicities. So we do that one at a time. So first of all, let's say we want to know this one first. So given an investor transacting a stock, how many advisors could there be? I told you that the person who is your advisor may not always be in the office on the day you call up. So what should that tell you about how many advisors could conduct a transaction for an investor? Well, it's not going to be 0, because if it was 0, we would not have it in the database. So this is a case where 0 is clearly wrong. Okay, just a sec. I want to explain why. In a relationship, we would not bother to have the transaction in the database if the transaction had not occurred. Okay? So, I see. An investor may not have actually bought that stock, so it could be 0. Yep. This case, it could be 0 because the investor may not have bought the stock from anyone. Yes, so it could be 0. So, it could be 0, but on the 1, what if you call in on different days? On different days, different advisors are there. It's 0 to many, because you normally would you'd normally purchase or sell the stock with your own advisor. But if your own advisor isn't there that day, you're going to do it with someone else. Okay? Or over time, maybe your advisor left the firm and someone else did it. So it's definitely a case where it's 0 to many. Yes? It's how many occurrences could occur. Given one investor and one stock, how many transactions could have occurred? So with that, so in this case, no transaction may have occurred, in which case there's no advisor, but they may have bought multiple times from multiple advisors. So you're counting number of occurrences of an entity. Yes.
So in the relationship between advisor and investor, it says that an investor can only have one advisor. Is that specific to each transaction, or is that?
No, that's a different thing. So this is providing financial advice. So normally
Because if you can switch advisors in a transaction, then why is it saying one-to-one is you can only have one?
So at any one time, okay, so the way things operate at brokerage firms is you are assigned an advisor. You can call up and ask for information about stocks or about what you think you should do. Should I buy this stock? Should I sell this stock? What's your recommendation? So that is a person who's giving you advice. That's separate from actually buying or selling a stock. So some days you just may call up and ask for advice, or in the old days you might not know how many shares you own, so you might call up and say, how many shares have I? That person would be your advisor. Okay, so it's a little different than actually doing a transaction. Other questions? Okay, so next one we want to get is we want to get the relationship for an investor. So given an advisor and a single investor, the question is, how many transactions may the advisor have done with that investor? So if you're that investor's advisor, probably a lot, right? You may have purchased IBM for them. You may have purchased Google. You may have purchased Apple. So, oh wait, this is, sorry, I messed this up. Yeah, this should be advisor stock, sorry. Okay, so the question now is, given an advisor and a stock, how many investors might the advisor have purchased the stock for? 0 to many. So maybe the advisor has never purchased that stock for any investor. That's quite possible. Conversely, it's quite possible that the advisor has purchased that stock for multiple investors. Maybe the advisor loves that stock and has purchased it for every single one of their advisees. Okay, so it's 0 to many. Okay, and finally we want to know, for a given advisor and a given investor, how many stocks might that advisor have transacted for that investor? Sorry, this one right here is what we're considering. 0 to many. If you're not that investor's advisor, you may never have transacted any transactions for that investor. If you're that investor's advisor, or you just happen to be in fill-in duty, you may have purchased multiple stocks for that investor. So, 0 to many. Yes?
So in the solution, what is the one-to-one relationship for the advisor?
So I think there, let's see, when I did it, 0 to many, 0 to many, I think that what I was assuming was that I should have really made it 0 to many. I think I was assuming that the person's advisor always made the purchase for them. So if I'm making that assumption, which is not a good one actually, then it would be 1 to 1. But if that were the case, you really wouldn't need the advisor as part of this relationship either, because it would be inferred. So if I can find the old PowerPoint for that, I will change it, because it really should be 0 to many. Now, there is a final thing here. You'll notice, whoops, in the solution, so this is the solution now, and I know, did I ever say manages? I may have missed something. Did I miss something? I think I missed a relationship. Did I miss a relationship? Advisor. Maybe. I missed something. An office is managed by one of its advisors. So I messed up in my solution. I missed this one. So down here, office should have had a advisor number. I will fix it. There should be advisor number right here with office. And for office, there should be advisor number because right here, an office is managed by one of its advisors. So there was, in fact, one that I missed. An office, an advisor manages an office. It said that an office is managed by one advisor. In general, how many offices do you think an advisor, minimum and maximum, that an advisor should manage? Maximum of 1 and minimum of 0. Not every advisor manages an office. So it should be 0 to 1. So I need to update my solution because, as I said, it is missing this relationship. So office should have an advisor number here. Down here in foreign keys, office should have an advisor number. So I missed that. I get points taken off from my solution. Now, down here is a subtle point. I would not ever expect you to have as a entity a dividend paying stock. So a stock does not have to pay a dividend. So you might decide to make the dividend field optional. So in a stock we have a dividend here. You could decide to make that optional, meaning it could be null. Or you could say that you have a subtype called dividend paying stocks, and the attribute would be dividend down here, and then you would remove the dividend field from stock. So stock would be the supertype. Dividend paying stock would be the subtype. And dividend would be the one attribute in the subtype. Again, I would never expect you to have this in your diagram. Plus, the way the book does it is this would actually be embedded in this one. Okay, because the way the book shows subtypes is it embeds the subtype within the supertype. So really, this should be embedded within stock. We call this a weak entity because it in some sense depends on the existence of the stock, but actually I'd probably call this a subtype entity. Okay? So I'm going to also get rid of weak entity. I'm going to call it a subtype entity. Questions about any of this? I know it is a lot to take in. But let's just quickly, I got about 5 minutes, I'm just going to quickly go back. The important thing on the homework assignment or on an exam, look for nouns, okay? Look for verbs connecting nouns. Verbs connecting nouns tend to be relationships. Nouns themselves tend to be entities. However, there's no however. Also look for multiple, if you have multiple nouns in a sentence, there's a good chance it is a multi-degree relationship that requires a diamond. And always be on the alert for words like multiple, 0 or more, associate it with only one. Those things are giving you multiplicity information. Okay, final thing, remember the distinction between attributes. You have uniquely identifies, tends to be a primary key or identifying attribute. Attributes that are in relationships tend to be foreign keys. So here owns 0 or more stocks. That's looking more like something that's going to be a foreign key. And the rest are descriptive information that will end up as an attribute in the relation. Okay, and the final thing, don't get roped into, most things will start with the firm or the university or the hospital has. The university has departments or the hospital has units. Don't get suckered into thinking that the firm or the university or the hospital is an entity. It's not. It's typically the database. Now, if I have a database of hospitals, that's different. Okay? But if it's just the hospital has a number of wards, that's not a relation. Wards is an entity, but the hospital is not. Yes? Typically, yes. Typically goes toward the foreign key. So that's true in one-to-one relationships. It's always true in one-to-one and one-to-many. In many-to-many, you get to choose which direction it goes. And my suggestion is direct it in the way that gets you an action verb. Okay? Okay. Good luck with it. And this one's due, remember, Friday, so you got to get cracking on doing your ER diagram because it is due in a few days.